Hello everyone, welcome back to today's story. In this episode, we follow Dee on what seems like an ordinary day, one filled with worries about work, money, and the future. But as night falls on a quiet rural road, a single unexpected moment forces Dee to make a choice that will change more than just his own life. From a split-second decision to help a stranger, to the emotional weight of responsibility, sacrifice, and compassion, this story shows how true humanity often reveals itself in the most difficult situations. Stay until the end to see how Dee's quiet act of courage not only saves a life, but also brings recognition, reflection, and a deeper sense of purpose into his own world. And don't forget to subscribe to help us reach 500 subscribers. Your support means the world to us. Dusk slowly settles over the wide, empty fields, the sky turning a dull orange as Dee pedals his old bicycle along the red dirt road. The wheels crunch softly against the gravel, the sound steady but tired, much like his thoughts. All afternoon, he's been going from place to place, asking about renting a small piece of land. And all afternoon, he's heard the same answer. No availability, too expensive, or come back later. His head still aches faintly, a leftover from the morning, and every turn of the pedals feels heavier than the last. Just as he's about to lower his head and focus only on getting home, something unusual catches his eye. Right ahead, in the middle of the road, a motorbike stands still. Engine off, no rider in sight. Dee slows down instinctively. Out here, at this hour, that's not normal. His heart tightens. He stops the bicycle completely and looks around. The fields are quiet, wind brushing through dry grass. Then a few steps off the road, he sees it, a young man lying motionless on the ground. "Hey, sir?" Dee drops his bike and runs over. The moment he kneels down, panic hits him full force. Blood is visible on the man's head, one arm bent at an unnatural angle. Doe's hands tremble as he shakes the man's shoulder gently, then more urgently. "Sir, can you hear me? Are you okay?" No response. Dee presses his fingers near the man's neck, holding his breath until he feels it. A faint pulse. Relief flashes through him, quickly followed by fear. The man is alive, but barely. Dee's palms grow cold, his chest tight. There's no one else around. No cars, no houses nearby. Just him, this stranger, and the fading light. "Please wake up," Dee says, his voice cracking despite himself. "What happened? Can you hear me?" The wind picks up, carrying dust across the road. For a brief moment, Dee freezes. He thinks about his headache, his exhaustion, the long day, the responsibilities waiting at home. But the image in front of him, this fragile, unmoving body, pushes everything else aside. Leaving isn't an option. As the sky darkens further, the man suddenly groans softly. His eyelids flutter. Hey, that's it," Dee says quickly, leaning closer. "Don't move too much. You're hurt." The man's eyes open just enough to show confusion and pain. He tries to speak, but winces instead. "It's okay," Dee reassures him, steadying his shoulders. "I'm here. I'll take you to the hospital." With careful movements, Dee helps him sit up. The man leans heavily against Dee's shoulder, breathing unevenly. Every step feels risky, but Dee moves slowly, talking constantly to keep him awake. He guides him onto the bicycle, adjusting the position so the man can lean forward without putting pressure on his injuries. Hold on to me, Day says. Just focus on breathing. He glances back at the abandoned motorbike, standing alone in the road. I'll tell someone to bring it later, he promises, more to himself than anyone else. Then he starts pedaling. The road suddenly feels much longer. Dee's legs burn as he pushes forward, the weight behind him making each movement harder. Sweat runs down his temples, mixing with the lingering pain in his head. Still, he doesn't slow down. Every few seconds, he asks, "Are you still with me? Stay awake, okay?" Meanwhile, back at home, Huyen stands by the new stove, stirring a simple pot of food. She glances at the clock again, her brows knitting together. Day should have been home by now. "Where did he go today?" she murmurs, mostly to herself. She looks over at BB, curled up nearby, unusually quiet. Maya's not home. Day's late. This house feels too empty tonight. The food is ready, but Huyen doesn't feel like eating. She sits down, waits a little longer, then reheats the rice. The warmth doesn't ease the worry creeping into her chest. Outside, the night air grows colder. On the road, Dee finally reaches the main street leading toward the hospital. His breathing is heavy now, but the lights ahead push him forward. When he arrives, he half carries, half drags the injured man inside, calling out loudly, "Doctor, please, help him!" Nurses rush over, guiding the stretcher into the emergency room. The bright hospital lights sting Dee's eyes. He stands there, chest heaving, watching as they cut away bloodied fabric and begin cleaning wounds. "Are you family?" one doctor asks quickly. "No," Dee replies, shaking his head. "I found him on the road. He was bleeding badly." The doctor nods, already focused on the patient. "We'll need to run some scans. Possible head trauma." Dee steps back, hands clenched tightly at his sides. He notices a phone in the man's pocket, and after asking permission, unlocks it with the man's weak guidance. The first contact is labeled Mom. Day hesitates for only a second before calling. "Hello?" A woman answers, her voice tense. "Ma'am," Dee says calmly, forcing steadiness into his tone. "Your son had an accident. He's at the hospital now. He's conscious, but injured. Please come as soon as you can." The line fills with panic, questions tumbling over each other. Dee answers what he can, repeating that the doctors are helping him. As the call ends, Dee exhales slowly. He leans against the cold wall, the reality of the situation settling in. He doesn't know this man. He doesn't know his family. Yet somehow, all of that feels irrelevant now. Time passes strangely in the hospital. The doctor comes back, explaining the injuries. Possible rib fractures, mild head trauma, internal checks needed immediately. "There's an advance fee," the doctor adds, $40. The family isn't here yet. Dee feels his stomach drop. He reaches into his pocket and pulls out the folded bills. The money he earned from days of hard work. Money meant for rent, for daily expenses, for the future he and Huyen keep carefully planning. For a brief moment, doubt flickers. What if the family never repays? What if he needs this money tomorrow? Then he looks through the glass window at the man lying on the bed, eyes closed, chest rising slowly. "Please save him," Dee says, handing over the money. His voice is quiet but firm. "I'll take responsibility." As he signs the papers, a strange calm washes over him. Fear and worry remain, But beneath them is something else, a steady certainty that he did the right thing. Late that night, Dee finally pedals home under a sky full of stars. When he opens the door, Huyen looks up in shock. "Why are you so late?" she asks, rushing over. Day explains everything. From the empty road to the hospital lights, Huyen listens silently, then reaches for his hands. "You did the right thing," she says softly. "Not everyone would." She reheats the food, prepares medicine, gently scolding him for not taking care of himself. As they sit together in the warm, dim light of their home, exhaustion settles in, but so does a quiet sense of peace. His simple choice, on a lonely road, has already changed more than one life. Morning arrives quietly, pale sunlight filtering through the thin curtains. Dee wakes with a dull soreness in his shoulders and legs, the kind that reminds him of last night before his mind fully catches up. For a brief second, he thinks it was all a dream. The empty road, the blood, the hospital lights. Then the memory settles in, heavy but clear. Huyen is already awake, moving softly around the room. She sets a cup of warm water beside him and places the medicine within reach. "You barely slept," she says gently. De nods, rubbing his temples. "But I feel lighter somehow." Before either of them can say more, Dee's phone rings. An unfamiliar number flashes on the screen. He hesitates, then answers. "This is Dee," he says. "Sir, this is the district hospital," a nurse's voice replies. "The patient you brought in last night is stable now. His family arrived early this morning. They want to thank you." Dee lets out a slow breath he didn't realize he was holding. "That's good to hear. I'm glad he's okay." "They also asked for your contact information," the nurse adds. "And the local authorities have been informed about what happened. Someone may reach out to you." After the call ends, Day sits quietly for a moment. He hadn't expected anything beyond knowing the man survived. The idea of attention makes him uncomfortable. A few hours later, while Dee is helping Huyen tidy up the yard, a motorbike stops in front of their house. A middle-aged woman steps down, her eyes red, followed by a young man whose arm is wrapped in a fresh bandage. The moment Dee sees him, recognition hits. "That's him," Huyen whispers. The injured man bows deeply, wincing slightly. "Brother, thank you. If it weren't for you, I don't know what would have happened." His mother steps forward, clasping Day's hands tightly. Her voice trembles. "You saved my son. We searched for you all night after the hospital told us your name." Dee shakes his head quickly. Anyone would have done the same. She presses an envelope into his hand. "Please, it's the money you paid for the tests. And more. We insist." Day tries to refuse, but Huyen gently nudges his arm. He finally accepts, feeling a strange mix of relief and embarrassment. Before they leave, the man looks at Dee seriously. "The doctor said a few minutes later, and it could have been much worse. I won't forget this." Word travels fast in small communities. By afternoon, neighbors stop by, asking questions, offering tea, shaking De's hand. He answers simply, repeating the same line. "I was just there." 2 days later, Day receives an official notice. The local committee invites him to attend a small commendation ceremony at the commune hall. "Do I really have to go?" Day asks Huyen that evening, holding the letter like it might burn him. She smiles. You should, not for yourself, for others to see that doing the right thing still matters. The hall isn't large, but it's full. Farmers, shop owners, students, faces Dee recognizes and others he doesn't. He sits in the second row, hands resting awkwardly on his knees. When his name is called, a murmur spreads through the room. Dee walks up to the stage, heart pounding louder than he expected. The chairman speaks briefly, recounting the incident in calm, formal words. How a passerby acted without hesitation. How timely assistance saved a life. As the certificate is handed to him, Dee feels the weight of the moment settle on his chest. Applause fills the room. Cameras flash. He bows slightly, unsure where to look. This commendation, the chairman says, is not just for bravery, but for compassion. Dee doesn't trust his voice, so he simply nods. After the ceremony, people gather around him. Some thank him. Others tell stories of times they were afraid to get involved. Admitting his actions made them think differently. Later that evening, back home, de places the certificate carefully on the table. The paper looks almost unreal in the dim light. I didn't expect any of this, he admits quietly. Huyen sits beside him. You didn't do it for this, she says. That's why it matters. In the days that follow, life slowly returns to its usual rhythm. Dee goes back to work, to searching for land, to worrying about daily expenses. Yet something has shifted. Strangers greet him with warmer smiles. Children point and whisper. Even when money is tight, Dee notices a subtle change in how he carries himself. Straighter, calmer. One evening, as he and Huyen walk along the same red dirt road, Dee slows down near the spot where everything began. The road looks ordinary now. No sign of blood, no fallen body, just dust and wind. Funny, Dee says softly. If I'd passed 5 minutes later. Huyen squeezes his hand. But you didn't. They stand there for a moment, watching the sky turn gold again. Much like that night, Dee realizes something important then. Not about heroism or recognition, but about choice. How a single decision, made without thinking of reward, can ripple outward in ways no one expects. That night, as he hangs the certificate on the wall, not proudly, but carefully, Dee understands that the honor isn't just a piece of paper. It's a reminder, a quiet promise to himself to keep choosing compassion, even when it's inconvenient, even when no one is watching. The world doesn't change overnight. Problems remain. Struggles continue. But sometimes, one moment on a lonely road is enough to remind a person who they truly are. And for Dee, that reminder will last far longer than applause ever could.